to the questions for the white people. My Lord. Did you grow up in a white or mixed race immediate family? Do you currently live in a white or mixed race immediate family? When was the first time that you think that an African American truly became your friend? How did that happen and when? What would you suggest that you have tried for other white people as a starter on this journey to eradicate racism? If you notice, along the way, I've changed a word here and there, but I changed a word here and there just to make sure that we start figuring out exactly how we're going to participate in this program. The brave white participants are Andy Swindler, Jennifer Lynn, Alan Hatchett. You guys, I hope you're there. I'm going to stop sharing and we'll go to Andy.
Hey, everybody. So first question, do I currently live in a white or mixed race immediate family? I live alone, so white family. I don't think we're not counting my cat and my iguana, right? When did I recognize that race was a problem and what did I do? I'm splitting this up a little bit. So I think the first awareness was more of an academic awareness. I remember reading Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail in college and writing an essay about it, which is just very much. I mean, it's an amazing essay, but or a piece, but it, that feels like a very academic analysis, not an embodied experience. So I felt like I spent a few decades of life kind of knowing and feeling there was a problem, but keeping it more at arm's length, maybe thinking of it more historical. But my real moment of being shaken awake, or as I sometimes say, out of the matrix, was Ferguson in 2014, after Michael Brown was shot. And for me, a lot of people judge the violence around the protests, but I got really curious. I just wondered what would drive people to that kind of action, and that led me on. It's just kicked off my journey. I read, I talked to anyone I could learn from who would guide me, and it's a lifelong journey of learning. It's one of the reasons I'm here, and so greatly appreciate all the stories, because I think hearing stories is the best way to get some of the emotional information and not just sort of the history and the dates. So at this point, that kicked off a lot of things. I won't go through everything, but Ben and I met through an organization called the Together is Better Alliance, an anti-racist organization. I also host a number of dialogue spaces where we can see and hear each other more fully, because I think that's really at the heart of humanizing this. I don't think we lack knowledge. I think we lack will and courage. And I'm on a mission to enroll more and more white folks in this work and create spaces where we can learn together as well. When was the first time I think an African-American truly became my friend? How did that happen? So this is actually my second time doing this, and this question really made me think a lot the first time, and it made me think about the definition of friend. I grew up in a small town in Missouri. I definitely had some, well, let's say there were certainly a few Black kids, a few Hispanic kids, but so I knew them and we were friendly enough in school. But to me, the difference is I never went to their houses. I never ate dinner with their families. So I don't, it made me realize I don't really consider them friends in that way. So it wasn't until I got to college at Evanston, near where Van is now. One of my best friends and bandmates, we played in our rock band together. was Black. And I think of him as my first good friend who was not white. And he also introduced me to the South Side of Chicago, where he had grown up and his mother still lived. But one thing that's interesting, I've had 3 really good Black male friends in my life, in my adulthood, and I've not really spent a lot of time talking about race or racism with any of them, which is interesting to me. So the final question, what would I suggest for other white people on this journey to eradicate racism? I've got a few here. Never stop learning. Be humble. Remember that these are not theoretical discussions for Black, Indigenous, and people of color folks. This is their lived experience. And that's really one I always have to remember and remind myself of. And these stories really help, because it's really easy, I think, to slip back into that academic mindset or whatnot. Remember that feeling bad and having a trauma response are not the same. Remember, we have much more to learn than to teach. And find spaces where you can share your own lived experience and unpack these complex and challenging issues while minimizing additional harm. I have found that to be tremendously important in my own journey. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer? Thank you, Andy. And Jennifer?
Hi.
Oh, there she is. Okay.
There I am. Thank you for inviting me to speak, Van.
Glad you did.
I live near Van. We are friends and neighbors. I grew up in an all-white family, and I have my immediate family is all white. My brother's wife is Indian, but I suppose that's not quite immediate. I think of 3 times in my life where it occurred to me that racism is a problem. I think, of course, in high school and college, learning, I had that general sense, like what Andy said, learning MLK in an academic way, but it was very cherry-picked and just a general sense that there is racism. But I didn't ponder it until I think the first time after college, my first job throughout my 20s was with the State Department at US embassies overseas. And the first job I had was in Cameroon. I was here in Africa. And my last name is Lind, L-I-N-D. And there was another woman my age who was also young, in her mid-20s. And her first name was Lynn, L-Y-N-N, with a different long last name. We looked nothing alike. And the Cameroonians all mixed us up. In fact, they thought there was only one of us. Like, they would see me and call me Lynn, or see her and call her Lynn, because our names sounded so familiar. And from my perspective, we were nothing alike. We had no similar names. And that was an eye-opening experience for me, that, sometimes I think white people think all Mexicans look alike, or all African Americans look alike, or all Asians, like lumping the whole area of Asia together, right? Well, in Cameroon, people thought all white people looked alike. And I think that just opened my eyes to think about the color of my skin and the color of other people's skin in a different way. I would have to date that as my first experience. The second thing that really affected me and made me think about racism is when I remember exactly where I was sitting, actually, when I heard an interview on the radio with a historian named Annette Gordon-Reed. And she's a historian who spent decades, she's from Texas, she's African-American, she teaches history and law. And she's the one who pushed against 200 years of false scholarship to prove Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings had 6 children. And that's not the important part. It's not interesting that they had children together, and that's nothing new about a slave owner having children with a slave. The interesting part is that we were told a false history. The interesting part is how we all learned all the happy stuff and comfortable stuff for white people about Thomas Jefferson. That's really the interesting part. And so in 1999, when I discovered her work, that kind of, I would say that really was a moment that made me educate myself in a, I hope, a more honest, complete way. But the third thing that moved me, I guess, that opened my heart, was in June 2015 with the murder of 9 parishioners in Charleston at the AME Church, Mother Emanuel. And when I saw a video on the news the day after, when 2 white police officers went to arrest the mass murderer, and he came to the young man came to the door, and the police officers put their guns in their holsters. They holstered their guns and walked him to the car and took him to Wendy's on the way to the police department. That, I think, kind of made me feel that racism is wrong, and that I think then only in 2015 did I begin to educate myself more fully to see not only that there is racism, but how much I, as an individual, and everyone I know who's white, benefit from it. And I don't think I'd really thought about it until then before. How the whole system is set up to keep me upstairs and to keep African Americans downstairs and to remove any sense of a ladder. That really kind of, that affected me. And it made me want to dedicate my time and energy to however tiny of an impact I can have to change that. The third thing, my first friend who's African American, well, funny, I grew up in a white suburb Washington, D.C. Van and his family is from Maryland, and I'm from the Virginia side, right outside D.C. It was essentially all white, but by chance we had a Black family across the street, and they were our friends. The older girls babysat us. We played with the younger boy. My parents went out of town twice in my whole life, and both times my 3 siblings and I spent the week. We stayed at the Johnsons across the street. So it's not that we were like ahead of our time or not racist or sort of aware of race. We just happened to be friends with the family across the street. The only Black family I remember in any of our neighborhood or any of our schools. And we slept over there and they slept in our house, and I didn't think much of it, but that was just a coincidence. But my first friends, I would say, were years ago when we moved here to Wilmette in Van's neighborhood. There were 2 couples that were both mixed race. One of the mother's Black, and the other couple, the father's Black. And they actually became 2 of my closest friends when we moved here. But I also don't think I was all that even aware of race. We just kind of connected. But they're my sincere friends. They're trusted. I have trusted relationships with them. And the last thing, what can we do as white people? I would echo everything Andy said, but I would add, I think to be so humble, to approach it with humility and work on ourselves deep inside, to not sound self-righteous or off-putting or to work on ourselves and maybe our own racism that we don't even realize is so deep within us because we were raised in, as I was raised in such an all-white world, that I think there are all sorts of ways I don't even realize in me, not to blame my upbringing, but to work on myself so that my messaging is more sincere and endearing and engaging. So maybe people will join me rather than if I come across self-righteous, like I know everything, then people will run away. So I think humility, I suppose my grandmother always said, keep your ears open and your mouth closed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. And Alan, are you here? You know, I didn't realize all my white people are from here. That's a great thing. Come on, Alan, come on.
Yeah, well, you know, you live in a white town, Van, so all your white people are going to come from here. Yeah, thank you, Van, for and asking us to do this. And I'll answer these questions. The FYI for those listening along, Van emailed us slightly different questions than what got posted in the chat. So I'll answer the ones that everyone else is answering and that were emailed. Did you currently live in a white or mixed race immediate family? I don't. I grew up in a white family. I live in a white family, so I'm super white, live in a white town. And when did you first recognize that race was a problem, and what did you do? That's a really tough one. I think all of these are really tough, and they're simple questions and particularly difficult. I think the first time that I realized race was a problem, it had to be really bluntly explained to me. I went to college and I had two roommates. One was white, one was black, and that freshman year, we ended up hanging out with my black roommate Huey's brothers, his older brothers, and we was a school in St. Louis, and they were from East St. Louis, and they took us out and took us to an apartment, and we were like hanging out, and it was fantastic, and it was like a grand experience. We were like these new freshman kids in this town, and these older guys are showing us around. It was just fantastic, and we were talking for a really long time, and ultimately at one point, Huey's older brothers were like, I think they were like trying to suss out like, who are these white kids that like, our brother is living with. And they're like, you know what driving while black is, right? And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And they just were, at that point, were just laid it out. They were like, okay, let us explain to you racism in America for these white kids. And it was like an entirely eye-opening experience, and it was one of those things that like, even at the time, I really didn't grasp all of it, and it was this kind of new concept, and I was just enamored of the information and the stuff that's happening, and honestly, what did I do with that? Absolutely nothing. I was a freshman in college, like it was great information, but it changed nothing about what I did in any respect at that moment. It took a long time for that kind of awareness to build into doing anything. So to the next question, when was the first time you think an African American truly became your friend? How did that happen, and when? And it is also a very challenging question, particularly because of that word truly. Like, how do we define truly? Like, how are we, like, I kind of want to like go to an easy answer, like, oh, I had friends, like when I was younger, like I was friends with people who were black when I was in junior high and high school, and I had a black roommate in college, and like, all that's true. And at the same time, like, they weren't all as close as my white friends. It was, like, they were friends, and some of them were, pretty good friends, but like in junior high, none of my black friends came to my house. I didn't go to their houses. In high school, the same thing. I'm from Texas. I went to Dallas, the Arts Magnet High School, the Booker T. Washington High School, Performing and Visual Arts, which is a historically black high school. There was 40% white people, 40% black people, 20% Hispanic and Asian, and I really should have had a lot of close friends who were black in that mixed environment, and never went to a party at a kid's house who was black, never had any black kids come over to my house. Like, it just didn't happen. So honestly, the first time I had an African American truly become my friend was probably like maybe 6 or 7 years ago, when I was married and had kids, and I was living in this, in Wilmette, and we, my wife and I made friends with another family who is in the community, who the mom was black, and like, that was it. That was the first time we like truly had African American friends who like came over, and we would hang out and like, go to each other's houses and really share and become friends at a very trusting level. So it was really late in life. And yeah, I can kind of go on. I know I'm trying to stick to the 4 minutes. What would you suggest to other white people that you have tried that you think helped you on this journey to eradicate racism? And I think the other two that have already kind of spoken had great information. So those are all really fantastic answers. I think in addition to those, I think the things for me that I've tried is to put myself in places where I'm like working on something, on like a project, or like on a maybe like a board, nonprofit board, or some kind of like activity or group where you're in those spaces with people of different backgrounds, where you're in an environment where you've got to learn how to equitably interact with people who are different and have different cultural expectations, and to really lean into that and to really try to pay attention to what your own cultural expectations are, and check yourself if there's a mismatch in the group. But I think that real like working together, that like service together, and that's where like figuring out the nitty gritty of like how things get done in a way that everyone's contributions can be shared and heard is a fantastic place to really learn the practical parts of eradicating racism. And I feel like it comes out in interesting ways in those spaces, and I really have learned the habits that I have that I've been taught from my culture that are sometimes not helpful, and to learn to try to eradicate some of those, and to really pay attention to the way people are speaking and needing to be spoken, like, you know, paying attention to like how often people are speaking, how long they're speaking, you know, who's not being heard in those spaces.